Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and do some more slug testing, and today we've got another new slug that we've never tested on the channel before, but we have tested this brand and one of their other slugs with, quite honestly, about as bad of a result as you can see out of a slug test. So with these, I have heard that they are much better, but I really don't know. But as for the slugs I brought out here today, I got some of these. These are some Sterling Big Game Series slugs. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 5/32 ounce, which I believe comes out right at about 505 grains. So definitely a little bit on the heavier side for a lead rifled style slug. And there's no velocity claim on the box here, but I will throw it up on the screen over here if I can find it on their website. But we have the chronograph to get what kind of velocity we're seeing anyway. And here's what one of those slugs looks like. Definitely nothing fancy. It looks very much like your typical Foster style rifled slug, maybe just a tiny like 16th inch longer or something, which might be where they get that little bit extra weight. But overall, nothing super fancy or different about it. But like I mentioned earlier, we have tested some Sterling slugs before, which was the Tornado slugs. They're supposed to be a Sabo slug, but they were absolutely terrible through everything we put them through. I've heard these are better since they're essentially just a lead rifled Foster style slug, but I guess we're just gonna have to see. But for the setup, we're gonna be running them through today. I brought out the Remington 870 Special Purpose with the 18.5 inch rifled slug barrel, and up on top here I have a Loophole VX1 2 to 7 by 28. Now yes, this is a fully rifled barrel with a lead Foster style rifled slug, and a lot of people think you can't do it or you shouldn't do it. Now you absolutely can, there's nothing wrong with doing it, but it doesn't necessarily mean you will see any better accuracy out of them with a rifled choke or a rifled barrel. But this is my slug gun, so this is where we're going to start with these and see what happens. Now as for today's test, I guess it's going to be pretty interesting. I'd like to do it the same as we typically do with these slug tests, shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and then move out to 100 and shoot another 3-shot group, but I guess we're going to have to go into it with a little bit of caution today. We'll start with the 3-shot group at 50 and see where we're at. If it's absolutely terrible, we may have to shift gears a little bit and throw the smoothbore barrel on that or something just to see what happens. So ideally, we'll get a group at 50 and a group at 100 and see how they do, but if they're terrible, we may have to change plans. So let's head over here and take this first group and see what they can actually do. Alright, so let's take a quick peek through our velocity numbers here real quick before we look at our target, because it definitely got pretty interesting there at the end. Now, I did a very quick Google search while I was out here on the range a minute ago, and I believe the claim is about 1,300 feet per second for velocity. When I'm editing this video, I will confirm that, if that number is actually correct or not here on the screen. But either way, we did not see that 1,300 mark. But for a high, we did get 1,275. For a low, we had 1,201, and that gave us an average of 1,236 feet per second. And of course, here's all your energy numbers and stuff on the screen based on the weight and their velocity from my setup, so you guys can see what we're actually pushing down range. So that gave us an extreme spread of 74 feet per second and a standard deviation of 23. So at least if nothing else, they seem to be relatively consistent for what they are. Now, I would love to see up in the 1,600 feet per second mark out of them personally, if I was going to hunt with them. Mid 1200s is a little bit lower than what I would ideally like, but for home defense load or something, that is more than good enough. And I should hop in here just to mention and clarify that 1236 is plenty good enough for taking a deer with it out to 50, 60, 70 yards or so. You're going to be carrying enough energy, and with a lead rifled slug like this, it might actually hold together a little bit better and potentially penetrate a little bit deeper as well, with a little bit lower of a velocity. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, not looking terrible for velocities up here for what the shells are and what they claim, but let's take a look at our target and see what that actually gave us. Alright, so let's take a look at our target and see what kind of accuracy we were actually able to get out of these. Now, we will start with the left target, which was our 50-yard group, which honestly wasn't that bad at all. It was way better than what I ever would have expected out of these, especially considering what we had seen from the Sterling Tornado slugs. So we were off to a pretty decent start at 50, so let's measure it and see what the actual number is. Alright, so at 50 yards, it gave us a 1.52-inch group, so 1.5 inches at 50 yards, that's not bad at all. That's absolutely more than good enough for whatever you would need to use these for. So considering how good of a start we were off to, I was expecting a whole lot better out at 100. So let's move over to that right-hand target where we see 2 bullet holes. Obviously the one on the paper, and the second one was all the way over here by the very edge of my target. I'm glad it didn't hit my new target stand. But I took 4 shots because the third shot completely missed the entire target paper, and so did the fourth. Now before I explain things, I guess I will measure the spread between those 2 bullet holes, but obviously it's way worse than that. Alright, so the spread between those 2 bullet holes is right at 6.15, so obviously terrible, especially considering we're missing 2 slugs on the entire paper. Now if you can see here, these 2 holes are not round at all. Those 3 up there were nice and round, perfectly center punched, very stable. These 2 down here are completely sideways slugs. They are straight up keyholes. I mean, you can really see it over there on that far right bullet hole. That is just a straight up sideways slug. So I think by the time we hit 100 yards, we were starting to destabilize. And with the velocities being mid 1200s, they could have very well been having issues right as they crossed the border of that supersonic velocity range and just destabilizing themselves. Or what I also think could have very well happened is by the time we reached about 75 to 80 yards, the blue little gas seal piece that's attached to the tail end of those slugs started to come off. And soon as that happened, it completely ruined all of our stabilization. So let's swing around and look at that, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I found. Okay, and here are the 2 little blue gas seal base pieces I found. Now, they're not glued on or screwed in or anything. They're just kind of a press fit up into the back of those slugs. But as you can see, they look relatively decently for going through a rifled barrel. But I found these 2 right at about the 80-yard mark downrange. Now, I suspect that our last 2 shots that completely missed the paper came from these 2 little gas seal pieces here. I think that these completely came off of there at somewhere between 50 and 70 yards, and by the time our bullet reached the target, it was completely off course and we completely missed the paper. And the 2 bullet holes we did have at 100 yards, these little end pieces probably came off of them right before they hit the target, and these little pieces ended up flying past the target into the woods behind it or something, because these are the only 2 I found when scouring the range. So that's what makes the most sense to me as to why we missed 2 of our last shots, is these came off much earlier than any of the ones had previously, and that completely destabilized our slug. So I guess we got some very interesting results here. At 50 yards, they seem to be pretty good. Definitely not much to complain about there at all. I mean, at that velocity that we're seeing, mid 1200s, would they be good enough to take a deer with them? Yeah, absolutely. But for me personally, I would probably still want to see a little bit more, at least up north of the 1500 mark for a lead slug like that. But it seems like these kind of might be ideal for just plinking at the range, or maybe a home defense scenario where you might take a 20-yard shot, worst case scenario. Either way, out to 50 yards, I'm calling it a win. Once we get past there, I think that it's just a case of them moving from supersonic to subsonic and just losing that tailpiece and just starting to just destabilize. Now, would that happen through a smoothbore barrel? I don't know. I would guess it probably would be pretty similar, considering that we didn't immediately see any separation from the slug to that little tailpiece at the back. If we would have been seeing immediate separation out of the end of the barrel, then yeah, the rifling might have an effect on it. But considering they're not separating till well past the 60-yard mark, I think it's probably just a whole bunch of little things combined here. So definitely not great at all at 100. If we could get that tailpiece to stay in, I think we would have a pretty decent performer. So I guess let me know your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Sterling slugs, whether it be the tornado slugs or these big game slugs? And if so, what kind of results have you seen out of them? And let me know what you might want want to see with the few slugs I have left of these moving forward. But I guess at the end of the day here, it's not a complete failure like I kind of maybe expected they would be, but it is still 50-50 chance, it seems. You can get some decent results, or it could absolutely go south on you. So I would say keep them within 50 yards and you'll probably be just fine with them. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.